I imagine that you've all experienced sweaty palms, shaking knees, pounding heart, rapid breathing, a pit in your stomach. These are the classic signs of fear and represent our body's protective response to danger. This response begins deep in our brain, in the amygdala, and when we're faced with danger, our amygdala releases stress hormones that activate other areas of our brain and our body and produce those feelings that we all associate with feeling afraid. Fear is one of the most basic and powerful human emotions that we all experience because fear is designed to keep us safe. Yet I question, what is fear protecting us from? We're all secretly afraid of something. And even though these secret fears aren't likely to harm you, they elicit the same feelings as true danger. And it's these uncomfortable feelings, the shaking knees and the pit in our stomach, that hold us back from facing our fears, from taking risks. Yet when we don't confront that which makes us afraid, it keeps us rooted in place, and it doesn't allow us to discover and to grow. So knowing that these scary things aren't life-threatening, I challenge us to alter our perspective. Let's acknowledge that by facing our fears, there are true benefits for our body and our mind. We all have a fear story. And I'm here to share a story today of a life that was transformed by actively seeking out and conquering fear. 9 years ago, I was living and loving my dream life. I'd been married to my best friend for 23 years, and with 3 incredible sons, we'd created a beautiful family. We called ourselves the Duncan Five, and how I loved who we were. As we all do, I had deep-seated fears, and my fears were being divorced, something happening to one of our children, losing my job or our home. I was afraid of losing the things that were most important to me. And it was a fear of being divorced and something happening to our family that I kept my suspicions of my husband's sexuality buried deep within. Has there ever been a time when you've allowed your fears to prevent you from taking action or from speaking up? In rapid succession, all of my fears came true. And I did lose so many things that were important to me. And it all began with these simple words from my husband. Kirsten, I'm gay. In that moment, my life that I have loved was over. I was devastated and I was filled with an indescribable hollowness. And while my husband was now light and free from the weight of his secret, I shouldered this crushing burden of our new reality. And I was terrified of all that lay ahead that I didn't understand. How does one even get divorced? What would happen to my children? Where would we live and how could I best care for them? How do we split a lifetime of stuff? And how do I walk away from this family that I cherish? Just 2 short months after that devastating news, I was on a business trip and I received the middle of the night phone call no parent wants to answer. It was the trauma center calling to inform me that our 16-year-old son had been in a horrific car accident and had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. I boarded the plane home not knowing if our son would be alive when I landed. And while I was on that cross-country flight home, I Googled his injury and I was terrified to read that only 10% of people with his specific brain injury survive, and most of those who do survive don't fully recover. I arrived to the ICU to see our son in a coma where he would remain for days. And for weeks, he didn't know who he was, where he was, or what had happened. And eventually, he was discharged to home and endless rehab. While our middle son had been physically injured, all 3 of our boys had been deeply traumatized, and they needed unconditional love, reassurance, and a guiding light forward. But I worried that I wasn't going to be able to help our children navigate their loss and their grief. I was so afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing, something that would further harm them. I desperately wanted to be their positive role model, but I was struggling with hopelessness and fear of what awaited us around the next corner. I was surviving minute by minute, and my life kept unraveling. We sold our beautiful home, I moved into a rental, and I became a 50% mom. I never, ever wanted to be an every other week mom. To not be able to say, "Good morning, how was your sleep?" and "Good night, I love you." To not hug my boys every day broke my heart over and over. Next was the breast cancer scare, which after 2 years of close surveillance was cleared. Then confirmed early stage and thankfully cured cervical cancer. And if that wasn't enough, my company unexpectedly closed its doors, giving me 2 hours to clean out my office, leaving me unemployed with 3 boys to raise. So now I had new fears. I was afraid that I would never find happiness or love. I feared judgment and shame. I was so afraid of all of the unknowns and what else was going to go wrong. I was suffering to the point that I debated whether my life was worth living, but it was a thought of further harming our children or my family that kept me from taking my life. I found myself dysfunctional and at rock bottom. I realized I needed to rebuild my life, and that had to start with rebuilding me. I spent many painful, lonely years trying to discover the new me. I immersed myself in therapy, podcasts, books, blogs, yoga, meditation, deep breathing, exercising, energy readings, visualization, and journaling. I tried absolutely everything on the quest to find the new me. But it wasn't until I started facing my fears that my transformation truly took flight. I didn't intentionally set out to reinvent my life by chasing my fears. It happened by chance. It started with a walk in New York City where I stumbled upon a bookstore and I was drawn to a little book called "Do One Thing Every Day That Scares You." A truly ironic purchase for somebody who was so afraid of absolutely everything in her life. I can't articulate why, out of the thousands of books in that bookstore, I chose that specific one. I like to think that it was karma giving me a gentle nudge in the right direction. With my book in hand, I made a conscious decision to do one thing every day that scared me. Each morning, sipping my coffee, I'd flip through the book looking for suggestions. I started really small, trying a new food, styling my hair differently. Then I forced myself to go to restaurants and bars and movies and musicals by myself. I had finally worked up the courage to go out to dinner by myself, so I walked in with my head down, my heart pounding. I ran to the closest open seat that I could find. I sat down, I busied myself with my menu, and I dared not look around because I was worried people might be looking at me and thinking, "Why is she eating by herself?" Well, a few sips into my margarita, I finally found the courage to glance up, and I looked around, and I realized that absolutely nobody was going to be looking at me or wondering what I was doing because for my first solo dinner out, I'd accidentally chosen a gay bar. So, like you, all I could do is laugh at myself and keep moving forward. I became bolder and I started taking risks that I could have never imagined. I ran off of a mountain to paraglide, took a lesson flying a helicopter, solo travel to international countries, and applying for jobs that felt leaps and bounds above my abilities. And my fear story is incomplete before I discuss dating after divorce. As a mom of 3 teenage boys, I was wildly unprepared to date. I was terrified to put myself out there, but I was even more afraid of being alone and never finding love. I went on every date that my friends arranged. I explored online dating. I even tried a matchmaker. I was going to try everything. And for those of you, no matter what your age, who've tried online dating, you know that it's not for the faint of heart. Every time I entered the designated meeting spot, I walked in anxious. What if people were looking at me and wondering, why is that middle-aged woman on a first date? I had a persistent fear of meeting someone dishonest at best, dangerous at worst. In facing every one of these scary scenarios, I learned something so valuable about myself. I realized how much I could do and accomplish on my own. I discovered that life just isn't that scary. I overcame my lack of self-confidence. I stopped worrying about what others thought about me, and I discovered my power. Even though I was a woman in her 50s, I had indeed been able to reinvent my life. I had realized that before I had allowed my fears to keep me small, I had been owned by my fears. They held me back from doing scary things and from speaking up. Author of The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho, writes, "Don't give in to your fears. If you do, you won't be able to speak to your heart." I had allowed my fears to close me off from my heart, preventing me from growing into the life that I deserved. How did I know that running into my fears was the right thing to do? I didn't. It was something that I realized in retrospect, and it was accomplished in tiny steps, one fear at a time. Was it easy, you may ask? Absolutely not, because facing our fears takes bravery, grit, and accepting that you could fail colossally. And I realized that with every fear that I overcame, it became easier, giving me the motivation to keep seeking out and overcoming my fears. There's nothing unique about me being able to overcome so many fears. You can do this too. Remember the amygdala that releases stress hormones when we're afraid? Well, a study from Sweden showed that the amygdala also releases dopamine, the feel-good hormone. And work from Japan showed that when dopamine is released in conjunction with fear and you overcome that fear, you experience satisfaction from your success. And just like I experienced, with every fear that you triumph, your body learns and reinforces the knowledge that you just don't have to be so afraid. Through my story, you've heard of the benefits that I experienced by overcoming my fears, but you don't have to trust me. Research shows that when we overcome our fears, it improves our self-confidence, pushes us outside of our comfort zone, creating resilience. It improves your mental health and problem-solving abilities. It creates opportunities and leads to a sense of accomplishment. Powerful, right? So where do you begin to face your fears? Well, first, you accept that you have your fears. We all do, and that's normal. You could educate yourself. Often our fear stems from the unknown. If you're afraid to fly, learn more about the mechanics and safety of flying. What if just thinking about your fear makes your heart pound and your palms sweat? Take some deep breaths and focus on what you are going to achieve when you face that fear. And start small. What if speaking in front of a large group of people makes you feel anxious? Practice in front of the mirror. If you would have met me 9 years ago, you would have met a woman who is fearful of what others thought of her, hesitant to speak up, push herself outside of her comfort zone, afraid to fully experience life. She certainly wasn't a woman standing on this stage, openly sharing her fears with you. If you would have asked the old me to describe my life today, I could have never imagined the incredible adventures, the people that I've met along the way, deeper human connection, and a life built in truth, courage, and love. And I've also been able to witness our sons and my family pushing themselves out of their comfort zone, facing their fears, and experiencing their unexpected gifts. No matter where we've come from or what we've been through, we all have the power and the courage within us to relegate our fear to the back seat. Yes, we can accept the presence of fear, but we're not going to allow it to direct our lives. I invite you to think about your fears. After all, I've just shared all of mine. What are you truly fearful of? Is it being vulnerable, the unknown, change, or failure? If something feels scary, it could mean it's the right thing for you to pursue. The possibilities await you, and you have more to learn. What is one step that each of you will take today to face your fear head on? It could be as simple as trying a new food or as bold as skydiving. And after you've faced down that fear, bask in the glory of knowing you did it. You conquered. You moved one step closer to showing your fear that you are in charge and you are reaching for the best that is yet to come. Thank you.